Okay, welcome everybody. Today we are talking with Joseph Morrow on the paradigm of school. That is how we do school. And we're going to ask the question, um, what is, what are the problems that we're seeing with school in the 21st century? And can we kind of find a solution to see if we could come up with a better way of doing school? So, Joe, why don't you go ahead and just give us a bit of your background, whatever you would like to include about your experience in this regard. And then we'll kind of just jump straight into it and we'll try to see if we can come up with first if we can identify the problems that we're seeing in school today, and then to see if we can come up with kind of a solution.
Cool, cool. So I'm Joseph Morrow. Bit of my background. Right now I'm teaching at St. Thomas More in Sanford, Florida. I've been teaching mainly algebra and this year actually Greek and Roman history, a little bit of administrative work. I mean, you know, how a lot of the society schools and private schools, you tend to wear many hats as you can, but my specialty mainly is in working with kids with special needs. I'm actually finishing getting my bachelor's in that, even though I've been teaching on and off for about 5 years. So a little of my background, I grew up going to many different schools. My parents are teachers. My mom was a librarian for a number of years, English teacher. My dad was more PE. He did special education as well. So I grew up, in a family with educators. Even my grandmother was an educator. The first school I went to, kindergarten and first grade, was St. Pope John Paul. I think that's what they called it, but in Christian River, Florida. So I went to a private school there, and then after that, I was homeschooled for 2 years, and then starting fourth grade is when I went to public school. Um, Kind of moved around. One school in fourth grade where my mom taught. Fifth grade, I went to where my dad taught. And then middle school, I actually stayed in one school for 3 years and then went to another public school for 4 years.
Okay, so you've
Um,
been in a
so
lot of
I,
schools.
I have. So I've had a lot of experience with that. I can definitely say, which I could jump into, but there was a big transition from once I went into public school. Uh, it was a completely different shift. I remember I reflect on like I stopped learning cursive in fourth grade, and it was recently that I realized it was because I went to public school. You're not saying cursive is everything, but I think it can be a testament to like what's the purpose of school, to which we can get into. But I just kind of want to give a little bit of my background and like what I've studied and my experiences with school because I think it goes a lot to say about the end of school because we are a product of how we're educated and what we're taught. So I guess I'll jump into a little bit of just my background, right? Grew up Catholic, Sunday school, all that. Public school definitely opened my eyes to a lot more things, much more secular. I got into music. That was kind of a big thing. Kind of altered definitely a lot of how I viewed the world and different stuff. Strayed away from Catholicism for probably about 10 years. Really, I think confirmation, seventh grade, was really when it was just a complete shift. There's just like complete turn away. Music kind of opened a can of worms, played rock and roll music, all different kinds of stuff. Um, and from that, I took many deviations. I mean, I went as far as like studying so many different religions because I was started to look for more of a purpose, right? Like after high school, played music, actually went to California, tried to make, you know, I wanted to be a famous musician. That was kind of my plan. Um, that was kind of what I gave everything to was the study of music, all these different things. Anyways, long story short, I started to realize there was more to life. And actually music was kind of a door to that because a lot of things in music sometimes like points to something higher. What that was, I didn't know. Yes, I grew up Catholic, but I didn't really have a very strong foundation that it was just kind of I just followed the routine. It wasn't that I actually believed what I was doing. It was just kind of this is what we do. So many deviations. I mean, I even went as far as getting my yoga certification, taught yoga for a while, studied some like Eastern Buddhist traditions, all these different things. I kept coming up to a point though, there was like something's missing. So I jumped to the next thing. And there was some truths in there, but there was always something not completely right. I mean, I went as far as I went to Maui, was a part of a community there, very, very hippie community, like, the epitome of most beautiful nature you can imagine. I mean, farms, everything. I mean, it was kind of everything I imagined, the kind of hippie lifestyle. And I lived it for like 3 months, but still something was missing. And then I went to a monastery, and that kind of changed everything. It kind of opened my eyes to like, this is what I've been searching for. Um, which obviously this talk isn't necessarily about that, but I think
Hmm.
it plays a lot in the role of in education, what is the end of education?
Exactly. Yeah.
And from my experience in public school, I remember the only class, my favorite class was math because it was concrete. You could not argue that 2 + 2 = 4.
Hmm.
It was like, you do this and you get this. You do this, you get this. And it was consistent. But I noticed even in English, in history, everyone had different ideas of the purpose of living, of life. And it just left me confused. Like
Hmm.
I felt like Pilate, what is truth?
Yeah.
Because like you hear different opinions of like this is the way to go, this is the way to go, but there's contradictions. It's like, well, both of you can't be right. Like when you're faced with two things, like those don't work. So then what is truth? That's why I like math because it was concrete,
Yeah.
very simple, and I kind of yeah, and maybe even music too, because it is very mathematical and I don't know, an escape in a way. I mean, there's beauty to it, but anyways, that's kind of my part of my journey.
Yeah.
And I didn't plan to be an educator. It's funny. Sometimes, like my parents are teachers, I always said I will never be a teacher. But I actually volunteered for a special needs classroom in a public school, and I fell in love with it, with the kids and working with the students. Um, so I was kind of like, okay, I think this is my calling. I mean, I joined a monastery for a while, I think a year and 3 months, but left that in order to pursue the vocation of starting a family and definitely seeing education more as my route. But as we're here today, what is the end and what should we do? Like, what is the overall way we
Yeah.
should educate? And I guess that's why we're here, right?
Yeah, so it sounds like you had a lot of experience with public school. Now, I, on the other hand, I never went to public school. In fact, I was homeschooled K through 12, except for second grade. So in second grade, I went to a small Catholic private school. But then after that, we all of my family, my older sister, me, and my younger brother, we went to that school for 1 year. And then after that, we went back to being homeschooled. So I was mostly homeschooled. And then for college, I went to St. Mary's, Kansas, so a small private Catholic college for 2 years. And then I was in the seminary for a while. And then you and I were teaching together in Sanford, Florida, at another small private Catholic school. And so um, I, I know we can identify a lot of problems with, the the modern school system, right? The Department of Education or whatever you want to call it. Um, but I think we could blame a lot of the problems on, on this or on that. We could say, oh, it's because bad teachers, or it's because because of social media, or kids just spend all their time on TV, or it's because of technology or whatever. But I kind of want to get away from just kind of the accidental peripheral things, because you could actually solve that. You could say, okay, well, take the technology away, or redirect the technology to be used better, or get better teachers. But I kind of want to go deeper than that. I almost want to make the claim that there's something essentially wrong with the very paradigm of how we do school in the 21st century. And I know that sounds a little bit extreme, and I'm not trying to be some kind of like, education rebel. Um, but kind of like almost a little bit. I'm not trying to hold sort of like any kind of extreme opinion, but you and me teaching together in the same school, I think we were starting to see some of the same stuff that is not just endemic to this school or that school, but I almost think it's basically because of the system, the very paradigm of school. And so what I like to do is lay out what school is, how we do school in the 21st century. And maybe if you have some ideas about that too. But basically, it's, you send your kids to school in the morning, you drop them off in the morning, or they take the bus or whatever, and they get there about 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. And then they sit in a classroom in a desk, and there's a whiteboard, and the teacher writes things on the whiteboard, and maybe there's 10, 20, or maybe even 30 students in a classroom, with one teacher, or one and a half teachers if they have a extra helper teacher. And then at some point they have recess and they have lunch, and then the students stay there for a few more hours doing school, whatever kind of subjects they're learning. And then some point in the mid-afternoon, like 3 o'clock, 3:30, whenever school gets out, they go home. Then they do a bunch of homework, which I don't know, depending on your grade, might take several hours. And then what do they do? I guess they eat dinner. And what do kids do with their spare time these days? Uh, Watch TV, get on social media, I don't know, play video games. And then they go to bed. They do the next day the same thing again. So it's almost kind of like adults have their 9 to 5 job. It's kind of like this industrialized, standardized school. And I think that can be done well, or it can be done poorly. But I almost think that we need to sort of re-examine how we do school and see if maybe there would be a better way that we can do it. What do you think about that?
I like that idea. I think how I want to look at it is like, what is the root, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe we can get to like maybe some solutions. But right
Yeah.
now, like, let's shine a light on what some of the issues are. Like, what is the
Yeah.
foundation of how we know school today? I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know what it was back before the industrial time, but if you look at
Yeah.
the industrial revolution, right? Like, what was the idea, right? Parents go off to the factories to work. So what did you have to
Yes.
do? You had to send the kids somewhere because the parents had to go work. So that's why you have that paradigm of it's like an 8 to 3 or a 9 to 5 because it mirrors what the parents are working. So the kids have somewhere to go while the parents work, and then they come back together, right? But where does education begin?
Hmm.
In the family. The strongest unit is family.
Yeah, I think in the home, right? With the family.
Exactly. And I had this reflection one day. Even if the parents aren't the best educators, there's something fundamental to just quality time with parents
Yeah.
when you're a young kid. Like the parents could not even be the best educators, but there's just something about that nurturing environment of quality time and spending with them at such an early age.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, it's strange because you notice like what do we do with kids? We take them, we put them in a desk, sit here for 6, 7 hours.
Yeah.
It's maybe if you're older you could handle that, but when you're a kid, how do you learn the most? By playing, by
Yeah.
interacting with the environment you have to learn. So I, and then the two is like, okay, what's the end? It seems like the end of education, at least at that time, was to make more factory workers.
Hmm.
That's why we teach higher level mathematics and sciences, which I'm not saying are bad.
Hmm.
Not everyone is going to go in that route, but we seem to put everyone in that so we can create more of industrialized factory workers. Because the end is, I don't know. This is just me like thinking, like what is the end? Maybe just their end is to make more cog in the wheel, more factory workers to create more production, so we can better the natural world.
Yeah. So of course, we're talking about, a lot of our experience teaching is in a Catholic school, and a lot of Catholics will say today, it's a very Catholic thing to send your kids to a Catholic school. And so of course you're like, well, yeah, of course. Of course you would expect that, you would send your Catholic kids to a Catholic school. And you actually might know more about the history of school than I do, but I kind of wonder about that because the Catholic Church, the Catholic religion, the way of doing things has been around for 2,000 years. And I think the way we do school today with, kids in a classroom, sitting at a desk, until 3 in the afternoon, and then they go home and do their homework. I think that's only existed since maybe the Industrial Revolution, like you said. I don't think kids were going to school like that in the 1700s. I mean, were
From
they?
my understanding, no. I mean, I haven't done like my research, but just talking to people and looking back at it, no. Like usually, like we would have you would have the farm or the trade that the father did, and they would
Yeah.
teach that to the kid. So like, and they're early, and then the mother would maybe like teach more reading and writing and different stuff in the home,
Hmm.
right? Or even like the women would, work with the mother and different things. But I don't think it was until a later age when they like, okay, maybe this is where I'm going. When it was more vocational, when they started to go more into like, okay, you're going to go and maybe study law or certain
Hmm.
these higher level of academics. Once
Yeah.
they got older, they would go into this, but a lot of it started in the home and the foundation, and it was nurtured there.
Yeah.
From my understanding, it was, well, as Catholics, right? Sometimes we have to adapt to help where we can.
Yeah.
And it seemed like because all the industrial and factory workers, even Catholics, were going out to work because that was just what the times were doing. So the Catholic Church had to kind of adapt the school in order to provide the need that was there.
Yeah.
So I think at the time, okay, it was necessary, but is it the best? I don't know. I mean, obviously, clearly, I think we can see something needs to be addressed.
Yeah. So what are those, I guess, so if we were going to identify the actual problems that we're seeing, what are you seeing that you could say this is the problem in school and this is what we need to address. And these are the kind of things that we can point to that makes us kind of question the system of school itself.
I think the root in someone who's worked in administration and kind of like where I am currently, I'm kind of like in the midst of the principals and vice principal kind of organizing the school and decisions they're making. I'm kind of like an ear. I sit on the meetings, so I get a lot of the insight of like what's happening. And I've noticed there's a lot of like disunity between what the school wants and what the parents want.
Yeah.
And that's just, I don't want to say it's inevitable, but it's like, okay, well, the parents are working, they don't have their hands all the time on the children. So the school has to take that responsibility because the parents have to go out and work and do these different things. Solution, I don't know, but the root, it has to be, from my understanding, is the involvement more of the family in the
Mhm.
child's like the more of the unity of the family. But then again, the way the economy is, right? Like sometimes both parents have to work. That's not
Yeah.
ideal. But it seems like the root of it is the family. If the family ties were stronger, I think there would be a better unity.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe starting kids such at such an early age is not as beneficial.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also think teaching more of like practical type skills, like whether it's like working with animals, farming, these different things, because there is a study, a friend was telling me, a lady actually from Poland, where she was telling me there was a school they actually implemented farming and different stuff into the curriculum.
Yeah.
And these kids were so much better because they actually had responsibility with these animals
Yeah.
and they had to care for them. And they could see if I don't go and do my duty, this animal is going to suffer because I'm not feeding them. There's a sense of responsibility and a sense of ownership that, like, yes, maybe in our day and age, we don't necessarily need these to actually survive because we have like industrialized farming and all this stuff, but there's still valuable skills to learn in them that if maybe we still had some of those implemented in the curriculum rather than these super high level abstract concepts, which aren't
Mhm.
bad, but I think there's a lot to learn there. Um, and I think synthesizing everything as a whole rather than little parts, like, okay, now we do math, now we do reading, now we do science, but it's like, can we have an entire like cohesive thing that's interwoven together,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, because some of the problems that I'm seeing in, as a teacher, seeing in school is, I think just kind of this basic fundamental responsibility, like you mentioned, um, that I think I see kind of a difference between kids who go to real school or whatever you want to call it, conventional school, and homeschoolers. And so this kind of discussion, I think, is going to come back around to homeschooling in some way, because so me being homeschooled, I grew up. thinking, well, homeschool is kind of the way to go. It seems to be better than real school. Um, and so sometimes I would get into discussions with other people about the difference between, homeschooling and, we always call it real school, but for lack of a better term, conventional school or whatever. Um, and some people would say, well, yeah, you should, you know, if you have a Catholic school that's close by, well, then why wouldn't you, send your kids to Catholic school? Why wouldn't you go to a Catholic school? And I was kind of like, okay, I'm open-minded. Convince me. Tell me what it is that makes real school better than homeschooling. And people often give these kind of arguments that I kind of don't think are very good arguments. They say things like, well, homeschooling is, um, you're so isolated from society. It's just you and your 14 brothers and sisters and your mom. And your mom can't teach you higher math, and you're not involved in anything. And I'm kind of like, well, that wasn't my experience in homeschooling. We were involved in a competitive soccer team. We were involved with things at church. We were involved in homeschool co-ops. My dad taught physics at West Point, so he was the one who was teaching us physics. So I felt like I was getting a better education than the other kids who went to the local Catholic school. And sometimes I would even kind of just poke them a little bit and I would say, hey, tell me what a predicate adjective is. And they didn't know. So I was like, okay, well, if I know what a predicate adjective is and you don't, then who's getting a better education? Now,
Do you,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, do you think it's because it was more personalized rather than this grand scale where you have a bunch of kids and you don't have a personal relationship with them as much? You know what I'm saying? Like it's more like directed towards you, and you can kind of more adapt what's being taught to that individual rather than on a grand scale where you have to make things as general as possible to accommodate for everybody's needs.
I think that might be part of it, but I think there's it's kind of like a double-edged sword because, or maybe that's not the right analogy, but I think because some people will say, well, homeschooling is this and real school is that, but it's really not always the case. So, some people say, well, homeschooling isn't as good as real school, and they bring up these examples of people who do homeschooling very poorly. So I think there's kind of like the essential, I don't know, maybe we can identify like the essential difference between homeschooling and going to real school. And then the rest of the stuff is kind of accidental or extra, you know? So let's say, not just a super good private Catholic school and then, a super bad homeschooling situation, because then you can't really compare them. We would have to compare a super good private Catholic school or, real school situation and then compare it to a really good ideal homeschooling situation. So like the ideal homeschooling situation and the ideal uh real school situation. And then kind of try to distinguish it away from these kind of like little accidental things or non-essential things that people try to point up. They say, oh, well, in homeschooling, um, your parents can't always teach you important subjects like math and science. And I'm like, well, my parents could. And then, maybe you have a good school or maybe you have a bad school. So I kind of want to get away from those little details and try to identify the essential difference. So again, when I talk to people about, okay, well, convince me. I'd like to hear your argument. Tell me why real school is better. Because, I did have experience with both. And then as a teacher, also I have firsthand experience of seeing the difference. And it's funny because almost everybody I talk to, they come back to this kind of like uh, the social aspect. So they say, well, homeschooling doesn't have the social aspect, and real school does have the social aspect. And so, how can you learn social skills at home? You have to go to real school to learn social skills. And I really don't care for that argument because I don't think that, well, first of all, I don't think the point of school is to learn social skills. I'm like, well, what about the education aspect? What about the formation that real school could give you that maybe homeschooling can't give you? So I'm almost like I can make a better argument for real school than a lot of the people that I talk to who go to real school. And that when they say, "Oh, well, social aspects, social skills," well, you don't learn social skills just by going to school. In my opinion, what you learn is how to get along with your friends. And so what I see is that people who go to real school, they learn how to be very chummy with their friends, but when it comes to strangers, they don't know what to do because they haven't learned social skills. Social skills have to be taught. You actually have to teach people how to engage with other people. And so I feel like homeschoolers, not all the time, but some of the time, homeschoolers seem to actually have a better understanding of social skills in that they're able to deal with their friends, their family, their relatives, and then strangers the same, that they're able to go up and talk to strangers that people who go to real school are not comfortable with doing. So I don't know if you have an opinion on that. Um, but I do think there's kind of like an essential difference if we can nail it down between real school and homeschool is well, first of all, the one-on-one. So if you're homeschooled, you probably have more one-on-one experience with your teacher, who's probably your parent. And then in real school, you don't. So it's more like crowd control. And so I think a lot of the kids kind of they slip through the cracks and a lot of things go unnoticed. And what I think that results in is a difference in discipline and a difference in responsibility. So I would say that with the modern paradigm of school, I think what we're facing is not only a crisis of education and knowledge, but a crisis in the education of discipline and responsibility. Because people forget that we have two intellectual faculties, the intellect and the will, and we need to educate both of those. So the intellect, you got to give people knowledge, like, 1 + 1 is 2, and what's a subject and what's a verb, and all of these other things that we learn in school. But what people forget about in real school is that you also have to educate the will, and that's with discipline. So you have to teach people how what the good is, and then how to choose the good, and that comes with um, this kind of formation and discipline that produces this kind of responsibility. And so what I see, what do I mean by responsibility? Basically, just that ability to uh, tell the student, okay, here, take this book and go put it on that shelf over there, and then come back to me. Homeschooled kids are kind of like, oh, okay. They take the book, they go put it on the shelf, and they come back and they say, I put it on the shelf. And then it seems like with kids who go to real school, like you tell them, okay, go put this book on that shelf over there. And they're like, huh? What? What am I supposed to do? Like they didn't hear you. Now, I don't know if that's just because bad teachers, bad situations, bad, I don't know what, but I think that there's kind of this essential thing, this essential kind of issue that we're facing with the modern way we do school that lets that kind of thing fall through the cracks. And we never teach discipline to kids. They never learn responsibility in real school. And I think part of the difficulty, part of the reason for that is we can't spank them.
It's funny. I had that thought because it's like,
I don't really, I don't want to go there, like we should spank students, but
no, I I think it's because of there's comfortability and a sense of just naturally a sense of authority instilled in a child from the parents.
yeah,
And when you have that in homeschool, especially at such an early age, and I was kind of thinking, I might go on a couple tangents, but I think it's all
yeah,
related, is like,
tangents are good.
yeah, I think when we get to higher levels, maybe middle or high school, okay, maybe a general sense of school would it could work. but I think the fundamental idea of sending kids to elementary school at such an early age
Yeah,
is
yeah,
awful
yeah.
because
That's an
that
important
early age,
distinction.
it's not so much about the abstract, but it's about the proximity to the parents and learning from there because they need to be more nurtured. They need to be more. It's like the best way analogy I can imagine is like it's coming to mind, but like a garden, right? Like when you
Uh,
plant a seed, like you have this little seedlings. Okay, if you were just go and take that right away and go put it in the big garden, okay, it'd probably die because it
yes.
needs to be constantly looked at, watered. Maybe you need to cover it. Maybe you need to make sure no bugs come. Like it needs constant care. And but if you just take that little thing and you go throw it into the big garden, it's probably going to die right away. It's either gonna things are gonna go through the cracks. But it needs to be nurtured. It's a funny analogy, but I think it's so true.
I think it's perfect because kindergarten, that's what it means. It means children garden, right? In
Oh,
German.
that's funny. Yeah, yeah.
So, so I think that is kind of the problem. It's like, we have to treat kids as kids. We don't have to treat kids as babies, but we also can't treat kids as adults. And so when you put your kids, you tear them out of the home and you put them in kindergarten when they're like, what, 5?
5, 6, yeah.
Yeah. And they go from being at home all the time. It's like, all right, honey, now you're 5 years old. Now you're going to go to kindergarten full time, 5 days a week, whatever that is, 6 hours a day. And they're immediately expected to, fall in line, sit at a desk and not move, never speak, and, do all of these things that you would kind of expect, high schoolers to be doing. Now, yes, I know this is a little bit ironic because I was just saying we need to teach kids discipline, right? But incrementally.
Yeah.
So, if school is there to teach, students how to eventually be adults and how to be good citizens in society and how to be virtuous, well, yes, at some point you do need to teach them how to sit still and how to be quiet and how to control themselves and how to have all this discipline. But I think that comes with certain steps. And so, like you were saying, you can't just put them in the big garden right away. You kind of have to nurture them, and so it's a I think we kind of need a sort of an incremental uh school. So maybe you don't throw your kids in kindergarten right away when they're 5 years old, or preschool when they're 3 or something.
It's
Maybe
funny
kids need
keeping
to
that
spend,
analogy. Sorry, keeping the analogy going, like even a
yes,
plant, right? Right? You don't trim it right away. You let it grow. You want it to grow as quick as possible and quick, and you don't touch it. You let it grow. You just keep watering, you keep nurturing it.
yeah,
Yeah, maybe like if it grows too out of hand, you don't tend to it at a certain point, it's gonna wither and die. But you let it grow at first. You let it go a little wild, so to say at first. But then once it produces its first like set of stems, then you trim it down. So
yeah,
then it grows back, but you let it grow, you let it grow, you let it go, then you trim it a little bit. It's
yeah,
little trims here and there, and I think it's the same way with like kids, like how we grow. If you
yeah,
just throw them in and you're like you start like suppressing, suppress, and not and it's not complete just like all anarchy, right? But there is
yeah,
a sense of like you need to play and you need to have this sense of like that's how we learn. I mean, you look at a child, right? How does a child learn to walk? They don't just get up and start walking. They fail, and they fall down on their face.
mhm,
But that failure is feedback. And I think it's the same with
yeah,
children. Like they need to kind of interact with the world. They need to get cut a little bit. They need to do these things, and we need to let them have, I don't say freedom, but a little bit to kind of discover things,
yeah,
experience knowledge, because
yeah,
that's how you learn the most.
yeah,
Even a plant, if you just constantly like shelter it, once the sun and a storm comes, it's going to wither and die. You
yeah,
have to expose it a little bit to that so it
yeah,
can it can be fortified. It can know what it's like. It can experience this. And obviously, a child is much more developed than a plant. So if a plant needs that, how much more does a child need that?
yeah. And so obviously, you can't teach a kindergartner trigonometry right away. They first have to learn about numbers, like what are
Yeah.
numbers, and then they have to, learn how to count, and then they have to learn how to add them, and then how to subtract them, and then how to multiply them, and how to divide them, and you work your way up incrementally to all of these things. And so, uh, I would say that on the one hand, it's surprising how advanced kids can be if you take them through all the incremental stages. So, some people will say, oh, well, you can't teach kids that. That's too hard. So, yeah, that's true. But if you do take them through all the incremental stages, starting at the beginning and working your way up, they can actually learn very fast and they can eventually get to very advanced things. But I think you do have to start slowly and work it up. And so that's kind of why I think there should be this sort of parallel incremental stages with the paradigm of school, so that maybe kids aren't sent to school until maybe they're 8, 9, or 10. I don't know. And again, it depends on the individual student, maybe some kids are ready, maybe some aren't. And then, maybe when they're 8 or 9, they can go to school like twice or three times a week for a half day. And then by the time they're in middle school, maybe they can go, you know, 3 full days. And then by the time they're in high school, they can be doing 5 full days or something. But then on those off days, if they could be at home working on all of those other skills and discipline and having contact with the parents and doing all of these things that we see that they need to have, I think that would be ideal. So I don't know, maybe we can kind of identify like what would ideal school be. But of course, ideal doesn't always work. Sometimes we have to bring it back down to reality.
Because that's what I was going to say. Like, ideally, yes, but then we have to look at the paradigm, the way the economy is, and
Yeah.
like both parents having to work just to make ends meet. I mean, like the finances, the way, like, way the money to survive, and all these different things. So obviously, that has to be taken into account. So I guess you could look at it too, like the ideal obviously would be that to incrementally, maybe like when fifth grade comes around, you start going to school here and there, which I think you would be what, like 8 or 9 around fifth grade,
Uh, I think so.
6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, you'd be about 10, 9 or 10 for I think fifth grade. But yeah, like then you've instilled these things in the child as they've worked at home. Um, and but also at home, then it would be the question of like, well, what do they do at home?
Yeah. What are they doing at home? What are they
Yeah,
learning? Are they learning anything at home? Otherwise, it's just wasted time.
I think at least in my mind, and I'm just kind of speaking out loud, but to learn more social skills, to learn more just in life skills, to interact, because you learn a lot from life skills. There's a lot you can learn. I mean, I've learned a lot just from gardening because there's so many
Yeah.
things that reflect the way that we learn. And I think children can learn that. I mean, there's even my favorite thing, especially with special needs, is why I really want to do gardening because there's so much valuable lessons in it, especially with special needs kids, because they need immediate rewards to see things. Because these abstract things, they can't quite synthesize it. They need more things. So like my hopes next year, which I plan to do with one of my students, which is awesome, is have an agriculture because you have to sweat, you have to toil, get the ground ready to plant. You can't just go plant a seed. It's not like you have to cultivate the soil. You have to sweat. You have to move things. You have to build things up. You have to water it. And it's just like, what is this all this for? Then
Yeah.
you put a seed in and it's like nothing. It's like, okay, what? Then
Yeah.
a sprout comes up and you're like, whoa, I did that. From all that toil and all that hard work and all that responsibility of every day coming to water, of making sure the sun, making sure the pet, like all these little responsibilities to make sure this little thing grows. And then it starts growing and growing, and then it produces a fruit, and then you eat that fruit. And you're like, all of that led to this.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when it's, and even kids, I think, can learn valuable lessons, but not just special needs. Because when you're in the abstract, it's like, you don't really see what it all it's for all the time. Like it's good
Yeah.
to learn this, but it's like, and you hear this even in high school. Like, why are we learning this? Why are we learning these
Yeah.
levels of math? It's too abstract. It's
Yeah.
good, but it's like, how can this be applied? They always want to know what is it, why. I think
Yeah.
it always comes down to why am I doing this?
Yeah. How to relate it back to reality,
Yeah,
into the daily life.
yeah,
So, like in studying philosophy, I learned that philosophy is based on common experience. And so it's not based on, scientific knowledge or knowledge that, you get from looking in a microscope. It's from thinking about the world as the world really is, and that requires that you have some experience of the real world. And so you can't do philosophy if you don't know anything about the real world. And so it is important that we go out and, touch grass and, all these kind of philosophical errors that people are running into today. Well, farmers don't have that problem. Farmers don't have, an existential crisis because they're out there, tilling the land and, and they feel pain. And, when they don't plant the things at the right time, the crops fail. And so they learn about reality. And so um, I think that this is something that kids need to be taught. And so ironically, I think you can relate to this. Even in our school, we were thinking more and more like, oh, we should add all these other subjects to the curriculum. Like, let's have sewing for the girls. Let's have car mechanics for the boys. Let's have, all these other great things like, oh, computer programming, and let's have finance so that they know how to balance a checkbook, even though nobody uses checkbooks anymore. But so how they can learn how to budget, and let's have home ec class, and let's have all of the language classes. And I'm like, this is all a great idea. But then I started to realize, well, but then how many subjects can you teach in one day? And if we're teaching them all these other extracurricular things, then, are they learning the basics? Are they learning reading, writing, and arithmetic? So it almost seems like more and more these days we have to supplement real life in school. We have to teach them more things in school because they're not learning real life at home. So I almost wish we could have less school and have the students at school for less time during the day, make it more efficient, and then have them go home and actually learn these other important things at home from their parents. But then the problem is parents are like, well, I send my kids to school, I'm providing for their education. I don't have to teach them discipline at home. I don't have to teach them how to garden and how to sew and how to hunt and how to fish and how to fix their car because, they're supposed to be learning all of that at school. So um, I don't really know what the solution is. It's almost like, we're identifying a problem, and even if we can't find the solution, I don't think we're doing nothing because, they say that the first step to solving a problem is, realizing that you have it.
Yeah.
But, Father Duverger always said that's why we need parent school because
No,
like we need to we need to teach the parents how to be parents.
no, it's so true because I think it really comes down to that. It's almost like I'm not, and the parents can mean well, right? I'm not a parent, you're not a parent, so we don't
Yeah,
necessarily know what it's like, but we can see it. I mean, as a
yeah,
teacher, you are in a way a parent. I mean, yes, it's not the same, and it never will be as having a biological child and actually
yeah,
like there's a tie there, like
yeah,
spiritually, physically, whatever. But nonetheless, like it really comes down to that parenting, like.
yeah,
And some of the better children, and this is just objective, are those who had stronger foundations in the family.
yeah,
And you see that time and time again. I can even say for my example, like yes, like obviously I've had crazy past, delved into different things, but I can say what always rooted me in so many different things was strong family values that were instilled in me
mhm,
and discipline and different things that I did have.
yeah,
Like whether it was just like, okay, I mowed my acre lot, I would do half, my brother would do the other, but just little responsibilities. And
mhm,
it seems small, but these little things that it was instilled in home. And
yeah,
then that could apply to everything. And it seems like yes, like a paradigm of like there's a battle between like lacking what the parents' responsibilities and should do, and then the school trying to supplement to that, and then the parents getting angry about how things are done because there's too much that the school is doing. But then there's just like this lack of communication and this lack of unity, and it seems like yeah, something has to happen in the home, like whether it's parent school or different stuff like that.
yeah. Because I feel like you can't teach a student in the classroom uh, how to multiply, and you can't teach them how to memorize 1492 unless they have some fundamental discipline instilled in them already, and that they have the responsibility necessary to go home and do their homework and to memorize the information that we're trying to teach them. Because if they don't have that kind of fundamental responsibility of, here, go put this over there. Okay. And then they go do it. If they don't have that, then they can't really learn any knowledge either. And I think that's a real sore spot for teachers, um, because we can't really discipline the students. And this is kind of a difficulty in the 21st century. A lot of people talk about how 50, 60 years ago, or maybe, I don't know, maybe longer, they were taught by Catholic nuns. And, the Catholic nuns, if you did something bad, they said, put out your hand and they hit you with a ruler. Um, and I think that instills a lot of discipline, even on the psychological level, that pain cements things in the mind. It cements things in the memory. And, if you tell a student, okay, stop talking, and then they keep talking, and the only thing you can do is tell them again to stop talking, then it's just going to turn into blah 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 blah, stop talking, blah 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 blah, stop talking, blah 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 blah, stop talking. Eventually the teacher is just going to get frustrated, and the student is going to realize that, well, what the teacher says doesn't mean anything because there are no consequences, so I can just keep doing whatever I want, and I don't have to have any discipline. I don't have to have any uh responsibility. I don't have to make an effort because there's no consequences. And so I think that leads to the teachers just being frustrated and angry, and kind of just being mad at the students because the students don't do what they say. And then the students, I think they just check out because the students realize, well, there are no consequences to my actions. And the teacher just yells at me because the teacher's angry. And so I'm just going to try to avoid the pain when the teacher is angry. Oh, the teacher's angry. Okay, well, I'll just shape up for 1 second, but then I'm just going to go right back to doing what I was doing before. And I think that ultimately leads to just the students looking out for number one, and they never learn any responsibility. That's why I wish we could have, actually like real discipline in schools, because I don't think that that would lead to, of course, we'd have to be very careful with that, but I don't think it would lead to, um, teachers just having, teachers can just beat the students. No, of course not. That's not what I'm advocating. But a little bit of corporal punishment, I think that that would actually solve the problem quickly, and it would preserve the teacher-student relationship, because the teacher could very clearly state, this is the policy, right? So during this period of the day, from this time to this time, there's no speaking. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. And if you do speak, well, then this is the punishment. It can be something very, very simple as, okay, you have to stand in the corner. Or, I don't know if I should advocate a little slap on the wrist, but something very simple that just hurts enough to make the student realize, okay, I'm not going to do that again. So then it's very clear to the student, okay, the reason you're getting punished is not because I'm angry. The reason you're getting punished is because you did something wrong. And then the students realize, okay, so if I do this, this is the right thing for me to do. If I do this, I get rewarded. This is the wrong thing for me to do. If I do the wrong thing, I get punished. And so if we have clear policies and clear consequences, then the students learn that kind of fundamental responsibility. And so I think that's one of the things that's lacking in the way we do school today, is this fundamental discipline. And it's difficult for teachers because, the teachers can complain to the parents and say, your kid is not very responsive. Your kid doesn't do what I tell them. And the parents are like, well, you're the teacher, figure it out. And we're like, well, we can't discipline them. That's the parents' job. But if the parents aren't doing that at home, then there's nothing the teacher can do. And you can tell, as a teacher, you can tell which families have a good relationship with their children, or which parents and children have good relationships, and the parents that do discipline their children. And they are very clear about what are the policies and what are the consequences. And I think a lot of people today are afraid of that. They think, oh, that's going to make, kids hate their parents. It's going to make kids hate their teachers. I don't think that's true at all. I think that actually preserves the relationship. What I found teaching was that If I could get the students to trust me, and I would always try to talk to them outside of the classroom. I felt that that was the most important thing that I could do to kind of build that rapport and to keep up that relationship with my students was I would go to them outside of the classroom and say, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Or hey, what have you been up to recently? Or what are you doing for vacation? And then talk to them about things that they're interested in so that they would know who I was as a person, not just as a teacher. And then I found that that made them trust me. And then in the classroom, I could ask anything of them and they would always come back because they trusted me. So if they did something wrong, I say, okay, you're running 3 laps around the parking lot now. And they understood that that wasn't because I was angry at them. They understood that was because they did something wrong. So I think that's something that's fundamental and key to teaching anything in school because that builds the discipline. And if you don't have the discipline, you can't teach knowledge.
No, no, it's true. You need those foundational fundamental base because like that's anything. Like if you have clear expectations, if you know the why behind why, like what you're doing, then it's clear. And I think that even goes back to the public school. There's no why behind why we're learning. It's just to get a job or just to do these things. It always comes back to, well, what is the purpose of this? And if you have clear expectations, they even teach this in like when I'm getting my degree, they teach about having procedures and policies that you talk about at the beginning of the year. So there's clear expectations of what's expected, what happens. If you do this, then you get this. Because isn't that even life? You do something, you get feedback,
Yeah.
right? You touch a hot pan,
Yeah.
what happens? You get burned.
Yeah.
There's feedback. Oh, shouldn't do that. Like you jump out of a tree. Okay, you fall. Okay,
Yeah.
there's gravity. These
Yeah.
simple little things in life that teach us. I do this, this
Yeah.
happens. And it's the same with like if you have that strong foundation of okay, you do this, this happens. Then
Yeah.
you can get to higher levels, but you need those foundations
Yeah.
set, established, so that you can take people to a higher level.
Yeah. Which is why I think kids need to climb trees.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And they need to go outside and like play in the backyard. And they
They
need to
need to
go,
interact with the environment. Yes.
they need to go pick up turtles or they need to go actually like dig a little, hole and make a
And
mud pie
try eat
or
dirt.
something.
I'm just kidding. No, I'm serious. But yeah.
Well, no, I mean, obviously we have to prevent them from doing something that will really harm them, like we have to teach them, no, don't touch that. That's hot. Don't touch a hot stove. That's hot. But of course that requires a certain amount of trust. And that's why I think these kids, they do need to go outside and play. They need to do all these things. They need to have real experience of the real world. So that's why I think that if kids don't have this real experience of the real world, they're not going to learn that kind of discipline. But the problem is if kids go to school all day long and then they go home and they have homework to do, well, when are they going to get that real experience of the real world? When are they going to go climb trees? When are they going to go explore the beautiful nature outside? And it's like, well, we try to do that in school. We try to take them on field trips like once a year, or we try to, have recess. But I almost think that a lot of the time spent at school is just wasted time, really. It's just kind of this, it's really inefficient. And it's like almost like we're stalling for time. Like, okay, shoot, we've got 3 hours to kill before lunchtime. Okay, kids, pretend you're studying something, when I really wish they could have those 3 hours at home climbing trees and finding salamanders under rocks. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really think like fun like that's what God intended. I mean,
Yeah, I think so.
you could go into so many things and like even just showing like how sometimes like how we interact with things, they show certain things. Like there's been studies time and time again, and I don't like, it might sound like woo, but like, there's some truth to it. Like even playing in dirt and doing these things,
Yeah.
it actually builds the immune system in children.
Oh, yeah.
There's certain minerals in the earth and certain things in the dirt. Like even someone who does landscaping, every time I would do that, my nails would go super. super long and strong. What does that mean? There's more calcium. There's magnesium. There's these different minerals that actually build the immune system.
Yeah.
And without getting too out there, but there's something to that. Like we were meant to do that.
Yeah.
That's how we're supposed to learn. That's
Yeah.
that's that's how we learn a lot of stuff is by like what is physics? You interact with the natural world and you learn certain things.
Yeah.
Like what is science? Manipulating nature and playing with it in different ways. What is mathematics? Abstracting things. But you learn all these
Yeah.
things by interacting with the natural world around us.
Yeah.
And we can get too lost in the abstract.
Yeah.
Abstract is good for certain things, but it all begins in the concrete,
Yeah.
what's happening around us, and,
Yeah.
and interacting with what's in front of us and these different things around us.
Yeah. And even besides the health benefits of playing outside and pulling weeds in the garden, I think there are, call them virtue benefits, you know, um, kind of this fundamental responsibility, and ability to make decisions, to make choices, and to find out that there are consequences to your actions, because really school is all about teaching virtue. And I think people forget about that. They think, oh, it's just about, teaching knowledge. Well, yeah, partially about teaching knowledge, but who's going to teach them virtue? By the time they're adults, if they just have a whole bunch of random, knowledge, like, oh, I know how to add numbers and, I know how to read words. Well, if they don't understand how all those things work together to make the person a more virtuous person and ultimately a saint, then they really haven't learned anything. All that
True.
knowledge is in vain.
I think it comes down to like what I was saying, thinking like, what is the purpose?
Yeah.
And I think we've lost sight of that,
Yeah, I think so.
even in Catholic schools, because it's so ingrained just the way it is of making another cog to better the natural world, just
Yeah.
to be a better factory worker, a better worker to continue production and all these things. But what is the end?
Yeah.
Ultimately, love of God and love of neighbor, right? The two greatest commandments.
Yeah.
And how is that instilled by virtue? Knowledge is good because knowledge, right? You know more. But I think what is the core is the will is the will seeking the good and desiring the good. It doesn't matter. Like yes, it's good to know things, but sometimes that can be an impediment
Yeah.
to actually loving and serving God, because sometimes we can know so much that it actually becomes a distraction from what really matters is the will pursuing the good, the ultimate good, which is God, and all things rightly ordered, which is peace, tranquility of order, right? And that comes down to what is the purpose is charity, to pursue God and to better things around us, the people around us, the environment around us, and ultimately to reach heaven. And
Yeah.
that is the purpose. Knowing things is good, but that's almost like I don't want to say the second most important, but like what is the most important is I don't know if you can order which is which, but like I mean, you even look at like some shepherds or some people who really had no knowledge or skills, and they became some of the greatest saints
Hmm.
because their hearts and their wills were directed to the good, and they interacted with the world around us. They may not have all these like book smarts, but they learned a lot of it just through interacting with the world and actually doing good and pursuing
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I think it says in the Imitation of Christ, I would rather know or no, I would rather have the virtue of prudence than know its definition. But then that brings up the whole point of knowledge, right? Well, the point of education and knowledge is not just to know random stuff, it's to know the good, and it's ultimately to know God. And the better we know it, the better we can choose it, right? You can't love something unless you know it first. And so the two go hand in hand, right? We have to educate the intellect so that we know things and so that we ultimately know the good and God, and then we have to educate the will so that we can choose it. And that takes hard work.
I'm just thinking out loud how we were kind of synthesizing everything we were talking about. Like, right, we were talking about at the beginning, elementary, kindergarten, all these things. What's the most important is instilling a sense of a loving environment, right? Like it's a little seething. It needs like the most nutritious
Mhm.
environment, love, virtues, all these different things, because that's the most important, right? To
Mhm.
cultivate the heart and the will towards the good. And then once that starts to grow, then you bring in the knowledge about certain things. But that's the foundation. The foundation is that rooted in charity,
Yeah.
right? And as that starts to grow, then you can start teaching the other virtues alongside it because you have the proper foundation,
Yeah.
the proper nutrients in the soil of the soul in
Yeah.
order to grow. That once it starts to grow, then you can add the knowledge and all these things. But I don't think it begins with the knowledge and then you teach other things around. I think it starts, and this is just even in the natural sense when it comes down to the family as the whole
Yeah.
unit, a loving environment of being nurtured by the family between the parents,
Yeah.
nurturing the child to grow in a loving environment, teaching it as it goes gently, and then eventually bringing in the knowledge once it gets to such a
Yeah.
degree that it needs that in order to operate. But I think the foundation and the fundamental needs to be rooted in charity for everything else to fall into its proper
Yeah.
place.
Just as when you're a baby, you automatically love your mother as an emotional feeling, but then as you grow older, you can actually develop that into a virtue. But I think that the difficulty with school is that teachers, teachers can love their students, but they really can't love their students the way a parent can.
True.
And and so that's why I think that we need to have um, we need to have school be kind of supplementary to the education that's provided at the home. Uh, to the point that we can kind of um, I don't know how to say it, but I guess ultimately school is to bring the student to full maturity, to make the person an adult. And I think that has to be done incrementally. The ancient Spartans, I think they would take the child, the boy from the home at a very early age, like, when he was 3 or something, and immediately begin to train him in the ways of war, teach him to be a warrior from the very earliest. And I think that that cannot be done properly without harm to the person. I think that that really, that turns you into a cog. It turns you into a robot. It turns you into, a soldier, but not really a man. It doesn't teach you to be a good person. It just teaches you to be a good soldier. To the point that, those Spartans, maybe they didn't really even have any ties to their family because they hardly even knew their family because from age 4 or whatever they were being taught how to be soldiers. And so I think we don't want to do that. We don't want to make that mistake in school today. We have to figure out how to make school um, teach teach the whole man, make the whole person, not just knowledge, but also the will, and not just make them a cog in the machine, but to make them a person. A priest once said to me that as a teacher, you can't just be asking how questions. When you're asking how questions, you need to change them into why questions. So, for example, if I'm asking, how can I get my students to sit still in their desks and to be quiet? Well, maybe I shouldn't be asking myself, how can I get them to be quiet and to sit still? Maybe I should be asking a why question. I should be asking, why should I make my students sit still and be quiet? And if you can answer that question, of course, the answer to that is going to be virtue, right? To make them ultimately a mature person and ultimately a saint for heaven. Then the how questions start to fall in line and they start to make sense in light of the goal as you're pointing out. So do you think maybe we can maybe this is a good place to end. We could kind of, I don't know, envision an ideal situation, um, and try to make it not too up in the clouds, too up in the air, but try to make it realistic. Um, and if we can kind of, come up with something to shoot for as sort of an ideal solution, maybe that can be sort of our our goal to strive for. What do you think?
I think so. Um, and I guess it really depends on like I think it really starts in the home. I think when it all what it's all coming down to is like instilling these things at an early age. And yeah, maybe ideally if we could, and it also depends on obviously the financial situation of the family and the parents, but starting school at a later age, and maybe even when we do start that schooling, not being so abstract as like you do this and this, more of a collective of education, especially at a younger age, like where you can synthesize more interactive learning. I don't want to say like a Montessori, but similar in the sense I don't know much about Montessori, but from my understanding, it's more like you interact with things and kind of learn that way, but more play to learn rather than just sitting at a desk for hours on end, because I think it's not in the nature of such a young child to do that. And I don't think it creates I think it's counterintuitive as far as like creating virtue. Like, yes, it's good, but what do we want? Just someone just to be completely obedient for no reason? No, we want them to be obedient for a good reason, for serving God, not just because this is what I say and do it. I mean, there's some degree of like, okay, yes, you obey, but you need to instill, I think, at an early age, why. So you have that in your mind of why am I doing what I'm doing? Um, yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, like you said, we need to teach them the why. We don't want to just, make them sit still and for no reason. And so I guess that kind of comes back to the why, right? Why do I want my students to sit still and be quiet? We've had this problem with uh, teachers, especially with boys, right? So boys in the classroom, uh, boys they're kind of rowdy as little boys, and that's difficult for them to sit still and to be quiet. And so a lot of teachers tend to think that uh, a good student is one that sits still and doesn't say anything. So that means girls are good students and boys are bad students. Not necessarily exactly,
Yeah.
but it kind of tends to be that way. And actually, I remember my mom telling me that, and my mom's an educator. She's been an educator her whole life, or she educated all of us. She homeschooled us, and her mom was a um, what do you call it, a teacher. Um, and my dad was a teacher, my dad's mom was a teacher, so I kind of come from a family of teachers. And so when my mom says things like this, I listen. And she said, "Well, school is for girls." You know, it's kind of like grade school is for girls because it's very easy for girls. They're good at sitting still and being quiet and doing the right things at the right time. And boys kind of struggle in school. But when you start to get to the higher sciences and more difficult, more abstract things, then boys start to be better at that, and girls start to be not as good as at those higher subjects. And so I think that a lot of teachers, um, for grade school, they tend to try to make the boys like girls in that, okay, hold still and don't move. And of course, that's detrimental to the education of boys. And so, we kind of have to teach teachers how to let boys be boys. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that they should just be crazy and run rampant all over the place. No, they do have to learn discipline. But we also have to um, find ways to let them be boys. And I wish that that wasn't just during recess. So somehow, I know this is difficult, but somehow we have to find a way that we can kind of implement school slowly, so that so kids as children, they can spend more time at home learning all of these important home things and then start to go to school incrementally. But then that means we also need to teach parents how to be um, how to be teachers, how to be parents. And so almost if I was going to set up sort of like what I think is the ideal school, and of course I'm not saying this is gospel truth. I just want to put it out there so that we can kind of, you know, get the ball rolling on having more discussions about the paradigm of school, um, with other people and get other people thinking about this and talking about this. I'd like to see school kind of set up as supplementary to homeschooling so that you have parents or at least a mom or at least one parent at home teaching the kids, and then the school helping the parent teach the kids, and then able to provide resources and then eventually classes in the classroom for the students more and more as they grow older until about high school, where they're in school full time. And I know that's difficult, and I know that I don't know how that's even going to work today because, because parents will say, well, I need to work. Both parents need to work. We can't afford to have a parent stay home. And well, then you get, I'd like to make the objection to that. Well, why do you, why do you go to work so that you can make money so that you can send your kids to school? Why not just stay home and educate your kids? What could be more important in your providing for the family uh, than educating your kids at home rather than, going out of the house, making money so you can send your kids to somebody else to get them educated who can't do as good of a job in loving them as a parent can. And so I know this sounds a little bit up in the air and a little bit high in the sky and a little bit idealistic, but I don't want it uh, to just be completely idealistic and completely fake. I'm hoping that somehow we can find a way to kind of rethink how we do school to the
Yeah.
point that the kids they start in the home, they begin to learn things in the home, then they start to go to school a little bit at a time, incrementally, and there's this constant communication between teachers and parents, maybe even like parent classes that the parents can go to, and the teachers can kind of work with the teacher or work with the parents on what to teach and how to teach. And then at some point, then yes, kids can, be in high school full time. You can get some kids on the path towards college, some kids on the path towards the trades. And I think that would be ideal. What do you think?
Yeah. I know. I think it's a good right. Isn't like virtue is the balance between the means, right? Like if we
Yeah.
were to say, oh, annihilate school or just completely homeschool, whatever it may be, I
Yeah.
think it's a perfect medium. Where that medium lies, I don't know,
Yeah.
but I definitely think it should start at that early foundation and gradually transition.
Yeah.
Like even if it's like okay, third grade, they're coming to school maybe like 2 days a and they're still getting stuff at home, but maybe they come for like maybe some like the parents aren't good at certain levels of academics.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe the teacher, like you said, could supplement things, or if they really didn't feel comfortable teaching it, the teachers could step in for a couple subjects to teach it, but then they ultimately go back to the seed bed of where the growth really takes place.
Yeah.
But I think that really is the best way is like a mix between the two. Once you get to high school, okay, yeah, like I think at that point they learn all those fundamentals and they have this proper foundation that if they go into school, they're fine. They're able to adapt. They're actually much better to adapt than rather in high school you're trying to like, really knock it all in. It could actually go smoother, and I think it would really, really transform the growth and our society in general because you would just have virtuous people who in anything they do in life would be add so much value
Yeah.
because they have a strong foundation and they can pass it on. Because as you notice, like a lot of times the parents pass on what they've learned to the kids, and then it just continues this cycle and this cycle and cycle and cycle of like the same thing day like generation after generation. It's like okay, where can we stop that and actually shift
Yeah.
the paradigm as we're talking about?
Yeah, so we almost need some like education philosophers to sort of to kind of like rethink, okay, how do we actually do school? And, can we make it better so that, we can actually figure out what the point of school is. And of course, we know that that's virtue and ultimately, sanctity, to make good Catholic souls for heaven. And
Yeah,
how can we get there? So I don't know if we covered I don't think we covered everything today. In fact, I'm even thinking of more things, I could have said or should have said.
same.
Um,
I mean,
but
it's a
maybe
big, it's
that's,
a big thing. It's,
yeah. But what I do hope is that this at least um, can kind of start to make people think about this topic and this issue, and maybe we can do more of this in the future. And that was kind of like the shotgun approach. Like, well, here's all these ideas. Are they the best ideas? I don't know. But I think we can at least start to discuss them and start to think about them and see if maybe we can ultimately kind of fine tune the process and come up with a more perfect way of doing school. So thanks a lot, Joe, for being here today and talking about that. I hope we can do it again in the future.
No, thank you. And, I love it. It's, uh, it's needed and, always enjoy the conversation.
Awesome, Joe. All right. Thanks very much.
Yeah. All right. Take care.